Welcome back to the Software Testing Happy Hour. I'm your host, Brent Jenkins. Joining me, as always, to my right, STHH6, Director of Support Services.
Sure.
And to my left, first-time guest.
Thank you.
John Ferraiolo. John, you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself? And just so you know, since you're a newbie here,
yes,
that's your camera.
Great, thank you.
Your very own camera.
I appreciate that.
Rockstar.
Thank you. So, John Ferraiolo, I'm the Director of National Strategic Accounts, and I've been with Checkpoint Technologies 10 years, and I'm very happy to be involved in this today. I've been asking since day one, and
you have been.
He has been.
I've been begging them, so thank you.
Here you are.
All right.
We finally let you on.
I appreciate that.
We're only 7 or 8 episodes in.
Yes. So thank you.
You're going to kill it, John.
I hope so. I'd like to be invited back.
Okay. All right. We'll
John
see.
has
We'll
been
let you
trying
know
to
at the end.
convince us to do a food happy hour.
Yes.
That's true.
Food.
Like me convincing
That
John
actually
to do
would
a
be
vodka
fun.
happy hour. And look, I won.
We could do a special edition food episode. That would be fun. Maybe a wing sample.
Wings,
Ooh,
yes.
That would be messy, though.
Yeah, I eat wings really gross. Like,
Yeah, I do
don't
too.
think
I'm
people
like
wanna see
shoving
me
the
eat-
whole wing in my
Yeah, and I
mouth.
use like multiple hands.
I'm a two-finger guy.
Fingers, yeah.
Okay, you're a clean eater.
Yeah.
I'm a like,
I like
let's
it.
peel it apart. Eat it.
Thanks for the
person.
demonstration. I appreciate
Thanks
that.
for that visual.
Okay, so
That's what I do
Disturbing.
best. That's why I wouldn't go on camera eating
Okay.
wings.
Okay.
so today we're going to be talking about, just based off of a number of articles that we've kind of come across, and actually our own actual experience. Your phone's going on. See, this is why you're not invited, John.
Turn your phone on.
We're gonna have to ask you to
silent, John.
leave.
Oh my
I
goodness.
thought I did. Sorry.
Typical
Alright.
sales guys.
So based off of dealing with our own clients and that sort of thing around mobile testing, we're going to be talking about the advantages and the disadvantages on testing on real devices versus emulators. So, but before we do that, I need to, as always, I need to thank our sponsor, Checkpoint Technologies, for making this all possible. Checkpoint Technologies helps organizations like yours deliver higher quality applications to market faster, and we do that with expert services like assessments, staff augmentation, consulting, training, mentoring, and more, and best-of-breed software partners like Microfocus, Atlassian, Mobile Labs, QA Symphony, Cobaton, and so on.
Yep.
So with that, let's get... Oh, wait.
We don't have
So
a
our
beer.
resident beer snob is not here, but if anybody's been watching from the very beginning, they'll remember I think it was the first episode.
Probably the first
STHH6
3 continuously.
asked me if we could do a vodka episode, and I promised her we would. And actually, it was the bargaining chip in doing the Irish whiskey on our St. Patty's Day
I drank
special.
whiskey, so I get fine for now.
So here we are. We're doing a vodka episode, so I'll let you tell everybody what we're drinking.
Today we're going to drink Deep Eddy's vodka. I'm born and bred in Austin, Texas. I've been to the distillery. If you ever get a chance, try the Ruby Red because it's amazing.
Keep it weird.
Keep it weird, Austin. So yeah. And we're actually mixing it with Sprite because we decided it would not be good to drink vodka on the rocks on camera.
I mean, it would be good, but on camera is a different
Right.
story.
And we hope my husband doesn't watch this.
Okay.
What
You
the
can
heck?
cut that part out.
Wow.
I can't just cut parts out every episode based on what you said.
I just
I'm
want to
just
say
kidding.
for the record, I'm not sure if I want to come back after this episode. But thank you. Help.
And John's drinking cranberry juice.
Cranberry juice.
Yes. I
John's
am.
the responsible adult here.
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to start out by talking about some of the advantage of testing on real devices, and I kind of put a little bit of a bullet list here. I'm going to kind of read out what we wrote down here, and just ask you guys if you want to expand on it at all.
Sure.
Okay. So the point number 1 is one of the advantages of testing on real devices is it minimizes exposure to quality risks, security, and performance. What do you think about that?
Well, I think anytime you're going to be doing software quality testing, right, you have to kind of minimize the gap of what is really happening versus in real life and users that are using that application
Right.
versus what you're going to be testing.
Right.
And it's not a perfect world. It's difficult to get that. But when you're talking about emulators versus real devices,
Right.
emulators are far from being close to what real user are
That's a
using.
very good point.
So,
No, absolutely.
I agree with what John said.
Yeah.
That was
no,
that was pretty much all there was
can't
to say.
really say
Yeah,
it much better than that.
Yeah.
Very good.
thanks. Hey, okay. I'm done. Hey!
Hey!
So the point number 2, advantage of testing on real devices, it allows testers to operate as an end user. I mean, that's very similar to what you talked about there.
I'm going to talk first this time because I think John will steal all my points. Otherwise.
Okay.
All right, you go
I'm
first.
just going to say, especially because customer experience has become the forefront of application development in general. Everyone knows consumers want things right away. They want it perfectly delivered and functioning the way they want.
Right.
So that's really where people are looking for testing and things like that. So I think that's your biggest differentiator. And John
So UX is kind of a big point.
And I think you can't really do UX as well with emulation that you can with real world devices. So that's about it.
Yeah, no, I agree, Stan. As I meet with IT leaders and management of QA teams, right, especially the leaders of the companies, they talk about better understanding real user experience, right? They use that information to not only from a trending standpoint of where the direction they want to take those applications or their offerings, but also to understand, why are they losing clients or why are they retaining them? Why are they not increasing? Things like that. And I think any time that you can test, again, closer to what's real life, you're going to get closer to what that user, that customer, that buyer is really experiencing.
Right.
And I think any organization that is relying on, emulators to the full, solely or more so than real devices, they're going to get bit one time, right? Or several times.
I mean, one of the things to think about too, and I read this in one of the articles as well, is it was talking about, with emulators, you can't really emulate the background apps being used during the process as well. So, I mean, when you're using an application, if you've got 7 or 8 different background apps, accessing your location points and your data and that sort of thing, what does that do to the application you're currently using?
Right.
You can't emulate that sort of thing.
Or even like end services, like you can share from one application to the other. You can't really test that on emulation, can you?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I mean, I think emulations, it's the plain
to
OS,
that,
that, and you're accessing it via your desktop or your laptop, right? That adds a whole new layer of uncertainty, right? So having that physical device, and having that application, the data going back and forth on the physical device of a mobile physical device that has, different memory, just whole infrastructure compared to a desktop or laptop, I think it's much better.
Right. No, it's a good point. One of the things here that one of the articles that I'm kind of referencing brought up was, and this one kind of caught me off guard because I feel like emulators can do this, but it's talking about mobile devices running different OS flavors. I mean, you can generally emulate that sort of thing, right?
I think there is a use case for emulation.
Yes.
In an early phase.
I think an early phase, maybe, with the testing the native IDE, right? At an early stage, I think there is. So I think there's an organization can use both at different stages, but I think they have to heavily rely and focus on using real devices, going forward, more so than they did, 3 or 4 years ago, where there wasn't a whole lot of solutions out there that gave you easy access to physical devices, right?
And I think from an early stages functionality standpoint, making sure when you're developing, in the DevOps aspect of things, testing little pieces of code to make sure it's functioning the right way. Emulation's fine there, but when you're actually doing end-to-end or full testing, there's a huge difference between the two, I would think.
Right. And then lastly, testing on real devices provide real environment conditions, increasing the effectiveness of a test. I mean, I don't think that's really saying anything that we haven't already said, but I mean, I guess you can throw in, I guess you really can't, because I was going to say you can throw in certain situations like, I mean, as silly as it sounds, but like the temperature and that sort of stuff. But if you're testing on real devices, unless you're testing in the wild, you're not going to get those anyways. If you have a device cart with a bunch of devices in the lab, you can't really emulate, even with the real devices, different weather conditions and temperature conditions. I mean,
from a battery.
So I mean, you got to think about this. Like your phone will shut off if it gets too cold or too hot.
It does.
Yeah, so if you're in the middle of a banking transaction, what happens? So if I'm in the middle of a direct deposit,
yourself.
if I'm doing cryotherapy and my phone, I left it in my pocket on accident, But no, seriously, I mean, like, I've been out hiking before in the middle of the winter, and my phone says it's too cold and it shuts off. Or I've been, when you put your phone in the middle of on your dash or something like that in the middle of summer, it'll shut off. What happens if you're in the middle of doing something? Yeah, if you're doing something.
Maybe I have a better phone than you. Mine's never done that. I'm just kidding. We have the same phone.
I don't think Sneha goes hiking.
I don't. I drink instead
You
of hiking.
just recently got a new phone.
She hikes from
I
one
did
bar
just
to the
upgrade
next.
my iPhone recently.
From like the oldest.
Only because it
cheapest
died
phone.
too.
Yeah. Anyways.
I don't know if you heard. I said Sneha hikes from one bar to the next.
I do. It was a good one. I actually just stay at the one bar.
Oh, okay.
This is actually good vodka.
I told
I've never
you.
had it before. It's very good.
Oh yeah, good distillery.
Very good.
The lemon vodka's good. The grapefruit ruby red's my favorite though. But
Why didn't we get Ruby Red?
I told you.
Did you? No.
That's for the next show.
Oh
All right.
man.
All right.
Next
well,
episode.
All right.
This
so
is
now
going to
let's,
my desk later.
so now
I'm just kidding. I'm just
it's on my card, so technically it's going to my desk. So now let's go into the disadvantages of emulators. I mean, I feel like the disadvantages of emulators is kind of, I can't imagine they're going to be too much different from the advantages of real devices, but
Right.
let's go into it. The first one here
Yeah.
states that it gives false test impressions or results. What do you think it means by that?
Go ahead.
I would say from a full user perspective, yeah, because you don't have, background apps running. You can't get real device metrics. You're seeing it basically as a fake layer over your machine. So it's really you can't pull performance metrics from emulators, can you? Right?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that's going to be close to what's real world,
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then
you know.
is your application, is it draining the memory, right?
Right.
Or is it draining the battery?
Battery.
What's
Things
it doing
like
to
that.
the battery, right? And if
so
you
we
have
don't know
your
those
mail
things.
we know
constantly
how-
on a push in the background,
Right.
how's that affecting? Because you can't emulate the other applications in the background running that are constantly on.
Correct.
Because how many people actually know about turning off background apps? Like,
Right. Not
there's
too
been
many
many
people.
2020 specials about
Not
that.
too many people realize that.
So,
No, that's a good point. Good point.
So I just wanted to read kind of one of the sub bullets of the article that I kind of pulled that bit from. They talked about, it says, giving the false test impressions or results, says it's hard to confirm data will apply to real device. So when tests fail on emulators, testers need to decide whether to double check on a real device. That's a really good point. So
Yeah.
if that test fails on an emulator, it's like, okay, well, was it the emulation or would this actually have happened on a real device? So now you got to go either just say
Take more time.
yay or nay, or you got to actually go and
Yeah.
find a real device now. So you're having to do double duty.
so at that point, what's the point of it? Emulation definitely can play a role
Plays
on the
its role,
development
100%.
side. But once you're trying to get to user experience testing or
Yeah.
real world testing,
Functional, right? How does the application work?
Right.
What is the user experiencing? I think physical devices.
even performance, you can do a
Performance.
lot more functional on the emulation side, but I don't think you can do performance on the emulation side at all.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, if you do, it's not going to be. It's not going to be close.
Realistic,
So
right.
what are you
Right.
achieving? I think that's what Brent was saying in that kind of sub bullet
Yeah.
to what you were reading, Brett.
Right.
Is that if you're going to question the results of a test because you're using emulation, then why are you using emulation to
Right.
test?
Yep,
You're just
No,
doubling
it's-
your work.
100%.
That's
And I think that's what you've started seeing in the last 5-6 years, these mobile companies coming out for specifically mobile device testing,
Yes.
such as Cobaton or Mobile Labs, because there's definitely a need for that. And I think
definitely.
within the next few years, every organization that's going to try to stay out of the game is going to have to be doing mobile testing.
Yeah, I think that for organizations to stay relative, right, they're going to really have to make sure that they're supplying the best customer experience as possible. So in order to do that, you're going to have to test as close to real life
Right.
or real
Real
user
scenario.
experience.
100%.
And I think that's the key, and so mobile
Right.
devices.
Consumers constantly want things quicker, faster, better out the gate. So
Right.
and
right.
mobile is the future. So not even the future. It's now.
Yeah, no,
It's the now.
It's
It's
the
not
now.
I mean,
It's the now. There's a lot of people trying to still get there,
yeah.
but
I mean, I think I
certain
saw.
industries, certain, yeah. But
I think I saw a study. I don't know if it was Google or a couple of weeks back. They were saying that just in 2018, they expect 27 million more searches and use of web on a mobile device compared to a desktop and laptop to
That's
occur.
insane if you
So
really think
so
about
any
it.
organization, and you don't have to be in a retail, right? You don't have to be the
No.
Amazons.
You don't have to be finance.
I mean, you
don't
have to be concerned as an insurance company, anyone else.
Any company.
Any company.
I mean, look, we're
Think
we're
about
a
the
QA,
apps on your phone.
We're a QA and software testing company. I handle all the marketing. I look at the Google Analytics of all our website and stuff. It's like 58% is done on mobile.
Yes.
And
Just for us.
Yeah, and we're a commercial. I don't know
Just
how
a
you would say
business.
it.
Yeah,
A business, a B2B. We're a B2B
Yeah, we're a
That's
B2B
correct.
company.
That's correct.
So how
And
many
even
people are
then-
doing research on their phones at home on their own? So think
Right.
about all the consumer.
Not only phones,
consumerism.
tablets,
tablets,
everything.
yeah.
And I was, a couple of artists, they talked about this whole omni-channel retail, right? And this goes to like retail, where they're trying to make sure that every touch point that potential buyer has, whether you walk into a store, if you're a brick and mortar, to online to that brick and mortar,
yeah.
it has to have the same flow. It has to have the same, touch points to really keep that buyer,
Yep.
right? I think it's funny because I've talked to several companies in different industries other than retail and your old school online retail places, right?
Right.
Like insurance. I've talked to an insurance company, and they said, "Well, we're working on mobile," and I'm thinking, "Wow, you're working on mobile
Just now?
And I thought
You're
that
already
was,
behind the trend.
Yeah, because I don't know if
behind.
you guys saw it. Amazon, they brought a top exec from an insurance company from London because they're going to offer small businesses insurance.
Like
and
a little marketplace for insurance companies.
well, no, they're going to offer it themselves.
Oh.
And they did a study where Prime members of Amazon, I think it was like 55 plus or 60% said they would definitely look at Amazon for life insurance and health insurance. So for insurance companies not to really think about mobile and what mobile means and what other companies are doing, I think they're going to have a hard time.
Yeah, they're gonna have
I
a
mean,
real
like
hard time.
I turned my lease in this weekend and got a new car, and I have Esurance. They're only mobile. They don't have really. You don't get paper stuff from them. Everything's via their app.
It's
so
really,
it's-
I mean, I think the transition between desktop and mobile is no different than the transition from print to web.
To web, right.
Yeah,
10 years
that's
ago.
and so we're just
That's-
making that next
I mean,
jump.
I remember
That's
years
true.
ago I was a graphic designer for a company that did like the auto magazines and the home magazines, and they kind of dwindled away because they didn't
Auto
make that,
Trade, the publication.
They
right?
did.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
also
exactly what it
greener.
was.
Oh, okay.
And
It's
they
also
didn't make
greener.
that. And they didn't make
Sure,
that
that's true.
transition from print to web, and other companies did. It's the same thing.
Yeah,
it's just a
definitely.
different platform.
Yeah. I honestly think, though, green is a huge initiative behind that. Going green, having
Right.
less paper towards
I think that
stuff
and just ease. It's just ease.
Easier,
Everyone
definitely.
wants something like
You
this.
always have your mobile devices with you. You don't
Right.
always have your laptop and computer
Right.
with you. It's as simple as that, really. All right, so next point. Doesn't provide true application hardware and software differences. So this says emulators are plain versions of the OS and don't reflect specific hardware
mentioned
software
that already.
features. So you kind of were talking about that.
Right.
So I mean, I feel like, so I'll just kind of jump to this next one. Different network environments. Emulators run, and this, I remember when you and I had a discussion about this one time in my office, and you were talking about this. I think you were getting to get ready to do a presentation for a client of ours and stuff. And this one came up, and I'd never thought about this before. Emulators run via internet connection. Real devices run via radio interface, then the internet. That it's a big difference
Yes.
between how they run.
Yes.
That's
That's a
big.
huge importance in performance testing in general, too.
Definitely.
Like,
Yeah.
people sometimes
I never
skip
thought about it. I
over
don't know
that
why I never
point.
thought about
Like,
that point.
Where's your bottleneck really coming from? Is it coming from the application on
right.
the device, or is it really just your network? Are you working on your hotspot off your phone?
Right.
No, that's
Do
true.
you have crappy Wi-Fi? I mean, there's a lot of different factors in that. So.
Not to throw companies under the bus, but
We don't have a
Starts-
problem here.
starts with an S and ends with an ectrum, but whatever.
Hey, there. I work with those guys.
Okay.
Scratch
I'll
that.
cut that out.
We'll cut that part out.
Anything else to add to that, or do you want me to just go ahead and move on?
No, I think
Kinda
based
sums
on
it
what
up.
we've talked
That's
about,
probably,
that kind of.
and I think, John, you speak to a lot of clients, and sometimes I'm on the call with you or not. And by the way, just so everyone knows, John has an automation background, so he has a little bit of credibility on the technical side.
A little bit of credit.
Just to give him that.
The person who
In case you were disregarding
the
everything
person
he
who
was
helped
saying.
Sneha work
He
our
taught
first
me my
automation script.
6 years
Thank
ago,
you.
yes.
So prior to joining the company 10 years ago, I was a practitioner of automation tools and was in the quality assurance team doing manual testing and automation. So yes, I do have some credibility.
Some credibility.
And I think that's one of the biggest differences when people, because that's a very common question we get. What's the difference, And I think that's the one John points out most, and I copy him and just say what he says.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay.
So here, and when we had that same conversation about the difference between emulators running off via web, the very next thing that I think you brought up to me that I had never thought about before as well was the difference in computing resources.
Oh, definitely.
So real devices have more limited CPU power and memory than computers that run the emulator. So I mean, essentially the idea there is your device only has so much CPU, but an emulator has all the CPU that the computer you're running it off of has. That's
CPU, memory,
right?
Yeah, everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, with emulators, you're so far away from what's real.
Right.
There's too much risk. There's too much
It's
uncertainty.
better than nothing, but it's not.
Correct.
Better
Enough.
than, yeah.
Correct.
It's better than nothing, but not enough.
Yes.
Really.
Right.
Did
Yeah.
you notice I switched
What?
cups with you?
Did you really?
I like that I did that without you noticing.
Wow.
The
I was
camera noticed.
I did it very sneakily.
Sneakily? Is that a word?
I
I
don't think
think
so.
so. I like
Okay.
making up words.
It is when you finish a glass of vodka.
Gotcha.
In the
Sneakily.
episode.
All right.
Jerk.
you put a drink in your leg.
I was like, I don't remember. I've been sipping this pretty
I'll
slowly.
give it back to you.
You're
I'll just
okay.
refill mine.
All right. And then lastly, mobile networks affect application behavior. That one I've.
So I think that it is correct.
Right.
I know a lot of organizations that I work with that are, I would say, a little bit more mature in their mobile testing strategy than others.
Okay.
They're using more Wi-Fi than the mobile networks themselves,
Like
right?
a 4G or
Correct. They're
Edge.
or
What
they,
else is
they're
there?
not, they don't necessarily have a contract with a mobile company for those testing devices, right? If they do, it's one or two, but for the most part, they're kind of maybe they're using
network
virtualization and
Right.
things like
To
that.
say, oh, this is a Sprint.
Right,
3G
because that way,
network versus,
and that makes
Right.
sense because they can control what they want
Right.
to test.
So if you're in a location where only 4 networks are available,
Correct.
you can test just those 4.
But you can you actually test the actual network? So like if I have a network virtualization, can I emulate T-Mobile, for instance, versus Verizon?
You can I
the
think the bands in
Okay.
which
The
they
bands,
operate.
like
Okay.
a Shunra or what's now NV by Microsoft.
Correct,
You could
correct.
do the bands. So
Fair enough.
4G, 3G, Edge.
Yeah, different.
what about
What was
regional?
before that? Yeah, you can do like Europe or
Yes.
South America.
Okay.
You
Or,
can do that, and I think that makes more sense than having an organization have these mobile devices
Right.
and getting a contract for a T-Mobile in order to do testing. Because, when you do that test, the network, the network might be here, but
Right.
there's not. Who knows what it's going to be like?
And
So
to-
you want to
4G
control that.
compared to
Right.
like Sprint or T-Mobile are just a relatively small difference, and most of the time they're all using the same towers and sharing them. They're all
Correct,
rentals
correct.
from each other.
Correct.
Right.
So really, it's more of a regional standpoint, and that's where, emulation does play a factor because you are emulating those networks, but it does make a huge difference than device emulation. Those are two very different things. I think.
No, I agree with you. Right, we're emulating a network, not a device, and how
Correct.
that device will
Is
work
responding or
based on the application you have, based on the network you're emulating.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And again, it doesn't. I don't know if it really is. It makes a difference, or it makes. It makes sense for a company to pay for a contract to have a network.
of every single network provider.
Or just even one, because there's so much, it changes.
So
So
many
if you can
variations,
control what that network looks like using like a network virtualization or something,
So you can
it
test
makes more
all of
sense.
them with
Right.
no contracts.
Correct,
Yep.
correct.
Gotcha.
So in some cases where, like the AT&Ts, the T-Mobiles, where they're testing their applications on phones, I mean, it makes sense to have a mobile network, a true one, compared to just using an emulation of a device, right?
Gotcha.
So,
Right. If you're testing actual call bandwidth, sure, it makes a difference.
Right.
But most organizations we work with, and I think most people watching this are outside sources. So
Right.
Correct.
that doesn't matter as much. So that's where emulation does make a difference.
Gotcha.
Right.
For network.
Network emulation is viable.
Correct.
Versus
Network emulation versus device emulation.
Two
Gotcha.
different things. So
Correct.
you want to
Gotcha.
make that clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Right. So to your bullet, you had talked about mobile networks affect applications' behavior.
Right.
And I guess that bullet was really meant to say having physical devices and understanding what that application will do on that physical device based on the network bandwidth or traffic.
Right.
Makes sense. But what we're saying is you don't necessarily need to have a
Doing emulation on the device.
network contract.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
You can use an emulator for network.
that.
We just want to distinguish the two emulations:
Right.
device emulation, network
No,
emulation.
very good point.
Here's my other question though too: how much do you know? Because you're pretty big into the mobile testing. Do you know what the difference is between networks? Like, is it that drastic between applications? Have you ever heard of it being like, oh crap, we suck on Sprint or something like that? Or
a good point.
or is it pretty minuscule
Yeah.
between those?
The organizations I work with, I think they compare like 4G versus 5G, things like that. But as far as T-Mobile versus
Carriers.
Verizon carriers, thank you.
Yeah.
I have not. I don't think they've really gone to that because they have
more
no
of the
need.
bands.
I think if I had an organization that was a T-Mobile, then they would be probably doing more
On
those
their
type
own
of tests
network,
and
right.
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 But then I think you're testing more of your own applications.
Yeah, but
like
did you want to kind of compete with, you
Yeah.
get T-Mobile gets a Verizon
So
contract
you
and see
would
what
maybe
it like.
so at that point, do you think T-Mobile and like all these carriers are testing their individual? Like, okay, we all have Google available to us. Are we all going to test Google and how it responds? As a
They
carrier
might.
standpoint?
I would think. I mean,
I don't
again,
know.
it's user experience, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's user experience.
Because I mean, there's definitely a difference using two. Like
and
Safari on an iPhone is definitely different than. Can you get Safari on an Android? I don't know.
I don't believe so.
Okay, but you can get Google on both, so
Right.
they
You can get
definitely
Google on
have to
both.
react differently
Right.
because
No,
they're different
100%.
OSs. So, who tests that? Google or the carriers or both?
I think anyone.
This is
It'll be
way
Google.
off.
No, it'll
Yeah.
be Google that would test that.
It'd be
Yeah, but
Google.
don't
They're
you
the
think
ones creating the
carriers would?
application.
But don't you think carriers would too? Just say, hey, look, we do better. I
It's
don't know.
possible.
But it's not really their
Yeah, I don't know how that works.
I don't want to say their job, but
Right.
it's not really.
But
their
isn't that kind of an
lane.
incentive, like to their network? Hey, look how much better. I don't know.
I don't think so. I don't think they would advertise that our network's
Yeah.
better than Verizon, but knowing.
Well, I mean, that's it is an advertisement.
No,
our
it is,
network's
but I've
faster.
never seen them do that. But I
Yeah.
would think they would want to know that internally, so they can make adjustments.
Right.
Because now with you don't need contracts, so the ease of jumping from one carrier to
Yeah.
the next, they got to do whatever they can to retain those
No,
customers.
you're 100% right.
So
I just totally
no, that's
sidetracked. us.
sidetracked.
Yeah,
us.
that's
That's
all
all
right.
right. It's okay.
It was. I thought it was a good question.
I
Yeah.
thought it was good.
So I'm going to rein it back in, and
Thank
I'm going
you,
to take a
Brent.
little. I'm going to steer. So we've kind of just discussed the advantages and disadvantages versus real and emulators. So John, I'm going to pose this question to you since you are kind of one of the main people in our organization that talk about mobile testing. So if testing on real devices is so important, how are organizations supposed to maintain all these devices?
So that's a good point.
Because I mean, you talk about there's however many different iPhones, however many Androids. You got the Google
There's
Pixels.
3 major iPhones out right now. There's
Right.
like
There's more than 3.
20 Androids out.
There's more than 3 because you think about you got the 10, you got
X.
the 8, the 8 Plus, and then you got the
Oh,
7,
yeah,
the
the
7 Plus,
pluses.
the 6, the
Haven't
6S.
existed. I thought it went 6 to 8. I
No,
missed the 7.
7s. So I mean, and those
Well, I
are
went from like a 5
those are
to a
and you're
that's
and you're
an
talking
8.
about just the ones that the company still supports.
Sports, right.
I mean, there's still people with
And
5Ss
think about like
and
you got
5s. and-
Samsungs, LGs, HTCs,
Exactly.
Nokias. Is that
Nokia
still a
still,
thing?
yeah.
Is it
Goog-
Nokia
you
or
got the
Nokia?
Nokia. Is what
Nokia.
I said.
No, I think
Then
it's
you got
Nokia.
the Google
'cause
Pixel
Nokia would be
and-
like anti-Kia car.
Oh.
Right? No, I don't know.
When you said Nokia, I was thinking Nokia, the pasta. Okay.
Oh, I was thinking. I said
Food
Nokia.
special.
I said Nokia.
Oh,
I
did
know
you?
I said
Okay.
Nokia.
Okay.
I said Nokia.
I don't know what you said. You're getting us off track again.
Okay, sorry.
So
I'm
your
good at
question
that.
was how does
How's an organization supposed to maintain that many different
Right.
devices? If you have to have the real devices, how are you supposed to do that?
So that's a great question. I think a lot of organizations, when they're starting out in their mobile strategy of testing, they believe they got to have all these devices to test with.
Right.
But
You
if
get
they-
hired based on your cell phone.
but if they really look, they have the capability of seeing what their users are using, and
Yeah.
so to narrow that
true.
down, right? So what I've seen,
You're talking about looking through like the,
The
app
App
store.
like Google
Or
Analytics and
Play,
things like that.
yeah.
Correct, right. So what I've seen is organizations do, Android, iOS, and then do the current.
The top like 3.
Right, and the current version,
Yeah.
and maybe 1 or 2 back, if that.
So on the current OS.
But
OS
so,
version,
but so do
excuse
they
me, yes.
have like an HTC phone, an Galaxy?
But not if they're. He's basically saying take your
it's
top.
just the operating
your-
systems.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, those analytics that they can find out, they can see what phones,
Phones.
they can see
specific
what people
phones.
are using.
So you're saying like top 10?
if that, yes, because I think a good start is anywhere between 6 and 10 devices that when I work with organizations, they're using anywhere between 6 to 10 on a constant basis,
Okay.
right? If they have to use more, and it might be those one-off tests,
Right.
but I haven't really run across that. Even organizations that are using public testing farms, I don't really hear them using the hundreds
Right.
of devices that they're
And
using.
there was like a study recently too, right? That showed like, wasn't it like 30% owned one specific phone? Not like it was a pretty large margin.
I'm trying to remember
top
that.
10,
I remember
you know
the study
what I'm
you're
talking
about?
referencing.
Vaguely
remember,
It was actually
was
told to
really
us
high.
about from Clay Montgomery.
Correct,
actually.
at
Yeah.
Kobaton. Hi,
Yeah, hi
Clay.
Clay. From Kobaton. I don't remember who did the study though. Yeah, I can't remember. But it was
I wanna
it
say
was
they had a third
shocking
party,
some of the
but
top.
Yeah, because it was a huge difference between it went from like 30% where
Well, and the
Apple
region
i10s,
was a big point of it, too,
regions
though.
were huge,
Yeah.
yeah. But it was pretty segmented in a way where it's like you could definitely
Correct.
pull, hey, I know I need to test these.
Here's my top
Right.
5.
Right.
What I see, though, is the quantity of physical devices increasing, not necessarily because the consumer or the external user is using X amount of different phones. It's because they want to test more continuously with other testers.
Okay.
So people will bring on more mobile devices because they have more testing efforts to do, and they have more.
So they're just
people
doing more
to do
because
it.
they can do more.
I also think
Well, different projects. They have more
Okay.
projects. They have more projects that need testing. So they might need
So you can't just have one iPhone 10 that everybody uses.
not
You
at
have-
one time.
Exactly.
Right.
Well,
So you might have 3
Okay. So
Apple 10s.
So
But I
then,
also think as mobile testing grows, you're going to have a larger and larger device base because you're going to end up keeping those because you're not doing contracts with carriers.
Correct.
So you have all these phones piling up over the years because you're able
you
to
know how
test further back.
fast they get outdated.
Right, but you can have a larger span,
But you're always going to have the latest version, and then
But
as you
then,
grow,
yeah,
you're going to
have those older
So then,
versions to go back
so then my
to.
question to you is, what do companies do if they can't maintain that? And then who, like you talk about, a company that has 6 different, locations throughout the U.S. and each one of them are working on a different project.
Are you referring to like solutions out there and how people?
Like what is? I'm just saying, how do people?
That's why
do
you
that?
need a mobile device.
Yeah, you need-
Does
You
everybody
need-
have to go out and
No.
buy?
If
No,
you have
no, if
7
you-
satellite organizations, that's what's really important about getting a good mobile solution that everyone
Allows
can
everyone
connect
to
so you
remote
can have
into
just
one-
one of each phone and maybe
Correct.
schedule them or have certain
Yeah,
times that people are using them to test different
You
things.
mentioned earlier like mobile labs, right? You
Right.
mentioned mobile labs in Kopitan, right? So you need a solution that is going to have these devices in a centralized location, either in-house, right,
Okay.
or in the cloud,
Right.
and then have the capability of anyone who's going to be testing it from your organization to remote in to those devices.
Okay.
And that's how you're going
Be
to
available
manage
to
those
their
better.
network, right?
Because I've seen organizations where they just have a drawer with 20
Like
devices.
my drawer.
Or a
Yes.
table.
Yeah. So what happens to the devices? What's the traceability of who changed the
Who
the
makes sure it's the
system?
operating
Who
system's
took my
updated?
phone?
Who took your phone, right?
That's
So
a conversation.
there are companies out there that offer solutions that allows people to access physical devices remotely. Either that solution could sit in-house in a company's own firewall, so to speak, or in the cloud.
Would you say
So when
too?
you No, go ahead. You go ahead.
Please, someone speak.
I was gonna say, year over year, wouldn't you see your ROI grow as you build your kind of internal device farm too, from an internal house standpoint? Because say there's a new iPhone released every 2 years. You're buying a new phone every 2 years, but all those other ones are still
every year,
relevant.
yeah.
Okay, so those are still relevant though, and you still need to be testing those outdated
For about 3
ones.
years.
So. Yeah, you're consistently building on it because your farm's growing. It's
Your
never-
farm
But
is
again,
growing.
it depends on your
But then-
your customer
Well, yeah,
base,
and you have to think
right?
who's the person that has to manage what operating system, especially if you're talking about you can't just put on auto update on operating systems. So then who's got to go in there and update all the operating
and
systems? And who stops it at OS
And that
10.5
goes back to
versus
the
10.4 or
Yeah.
10.3?
That goes back to the solutions. There
Right.
are solutions out there that allows
Handle
you
that.
handles that has audit trail
So-
to what's going on.
So just let me understand this for a second. When you say in the cloud, though, you're talking about some devices can live behind your firewall, so to speak, and the others can be in
Somebody's
the cloud.
hosting those
So
devices for you.
if I have my top 5 that I need to test,
Mm-hmm.
and they're in my office, but I have them connected to one of these solutions like
Yes.
that, and I want to test on the next 5, I can have access to those 5 somewhere,
Yes, that's
and
correct.
I don't actually have to physically own those devices.
That's
Correct.
correct. Yes.
Okay.
And at that point, you're paying for with Kobaton, you're paying minutes per test or something.
So it's accessing those devices.
how many minutes you're accessing,
Okay.
which is a really good solution because
No, it's a great- yeah, it makes
gives
sense.
you and from another aspect too. My heart and soul is from support, right? So
Right.
from a support aspect, you can troubleshoot stuff on devices that you might not ever have in house, but it's
Right,
like,
That's
oh crap, I need this because this person's having this huge issue, and it might be a huge person having an issue. So
Right.
Great point. What I've seen in helping organizations identify some of these solutions that we're talking about, the use case for these solutions and the mobile devices and truly having access to those mobile devices are expanding beyond just simply testing, right? I have an
Correct.
organization that has a large sales team, right? And their application is important to them to show people how easy it is to use on tablets. So instead of, when that salesperson comes into a potential client or prospect and they want to demonstrate what their application looks like on a tablet, they'll simply remote into that tablet that's sitting in
sitting
their
somewhere
office. And they'll go through the demonstration and show their application,
Yeah.
right? I've had an organization, their help desk, right? That when people have called in and said your mobile app or your responsive website is not working, they'll remote in, that help desk agent will remote
To that
into a
machine.
similar device,
Right.
and just try to see what that user's seeing.
Might be seeing, right.
So that use case is definitely increasing beyond just testing. And that, I think,
And
goes
that
back
goes
to what you're
user
saying, your ROI,
experience.
right?
And
But your ROI, right? Getting more,
constantly-
the ROI of using a mobile device is much greater now because it's just not about software quality testing as far as use cases.
Right. So then those types of solutions, I know you've mentioned Mobile Labs, Kobaton, Micro Focus
Micro
as
Micro
well.
Focus has Mobile Center, and
Yes.
they use the AWS Device Farm too as their kind of hybrid solution. So AWS has their device farm, so I think it's ADF or something like that. But
Gotcha.
you can pull up. I think they're emulators though.
No, I think they have.
they
They have
real
full. I think they
device?
have real
Both? They have
devices.
the options
Yes,
of
I
both?
believe they have both. Yes.
So I mean, you have all these, quite a few options out
Options,
there,
yeah.
but we can help you with all of those.
Yes, we can. We can.
Ching,
We can help.
That's
we can
John right there.
Well, we
John.
can help identify the one that's going to fit you
Work for
today,
you.
as well as bring you to tomorrow.
Right.
That's a
I
good
think
point.
a growth factor is a huge point because I think in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to start seeing just 1,000 tick-ups of mobile. Is that a word? Again, I'm
Again,
a
Did you
yeah.
say tick-ups or
Tick-ups.
hiccups?
Like tick-ups. Like it's just going to keep.
No.
going up and
So
up
for
and
anybody
up.
that watches the Trailer Park Boys and knows who Ricky is, that's her.
Constant thing for me, yeah.
Hiccups.
Pretty sure this was said in another happy hour also.
Probably, but it applies every time.
What do you call that? Like a constant growth or escalation? Like it's
Just say
gonna
growth
just
or escalation.
trend.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
Tick
know.
up like a tick, like a
Tick
tick
up.
mark. It keeps ticking upwards.
Pretty sure no.
Okay.
It's increasing.
Fine.
All right.
You always kill my dreams.
Sorry. I'll let you drink vodka.
Thank you.
That's it, guys. What do you think about the vodka? Well, you've had it before.
Yeah.
You didn't drink it.
I
liked it.
I love what
First
I'm
time
drinking,
ever.
so thank you. But I've seen the results of drinking vodka. Thank you, Sneha.
Wait. Why is it just?
Well, John, I want to thank you for coming on
Thank
for
you
the
for
first
having me.
time. We
Thank you,
really
Brad.
enjoyed having
Thank you, John.
Sneha, as always, thank you.
And for those who like what I had to add to it, please just reach out to
Reach
Brent
out to
and
us.
say you need to see
Right.
more of me. Thank you.
John's killer at
Let
mobile
us know if you
device
want to see him
testing.
again. How about that?
Thank you, guys. Thank
With
you.
that, thank you guys, and cheers.
Cheers.